Sometimes one can't help but to ask themselves this question: is it a crime to be born black? Throughout the course of history, the black race has suffered oppression and persecution. Of course, it's been 400 years, we are told, since the first wave of slaves were shipped out of West Africa and the rest of the continent. This year marks 4 centuries since my great-grandfather, your great-grandfather, or our great-grandparents were taken to the Americas and other parts of the world to toil and sweat, working in plantations like beasts of burden, with no proper rest, no proper dignified treatment. And this pain continues to linger in our hearts as the progeny of such people that were so wrongfully treated. Some of us have remained on this continent because 4 or 5 generations have been on this continent. Others too were born to those slaves and they live in the US. And they've been given labels like African Americans or Black Americans, whether in Europe or in the United States of America. Up to this day, the black race continues to suffer a serious disadvantage in terms of socioeconomic opportunities that need to be created, political opportunities in terms of representation and all that. For those of us who are great-great-grandchildren of 400 years of slavery, some of us have, to varying degrees, responded to that inhumane treatment. Some have done it in a very civil way through Black conscience and pushing the idea of Pan-Africanism and asking Black people living in the diaspora to come back home so that we can build this continent together. Others too have responded in a negative way through credit card fraud, defrauding white folks in what we call Sakawa or internet fraud in this part of the world. And their justification for their crimes is that these same people took our great-grandfathers as slaves and plundered and pillaged this continent and carted away our natural resources. The former reaction is civil and accepted. The latter is criminal and should be rejected. The Holy Quran says, تلك أمة قد خلت لها ما كسبت ولكم ما كسبتم ولا تسألون عما كانوا يعملون. Those are a nation that have gone by. They will bear the brunt of their actions, and you will bear the brunt of your own actions, and you will not be questioned about what they used to do. So therefore, I think it is wrong for a Ghanaian Black person, for a Kenyan Black person, a Nigerian Black person, a South African Black person to want to defraud an American or an European or a European only because you think the great-grandfathers of those people or the great-grandparents of those people took yours and mine as slaves. So let's respond to this inhumane treatment that continues to be an indelible blot on our history as a people and in our conscience as human beings through a very civil advocacy and activism, through Pan-Africanism and Black conscience, so that the Black man and the Black woman, whether on this continent of Africa or somewhere in the United States or Europe, will continue to walk shoulder high, proud of their culture and tradition, proud of their roots and origin, and proud of their color and competence. Steve Harvey is on a visit to Ghana, or was on a visit to Ghana a few days ago, and he's an African American. And when he was taken to a dungeon where slaves were kept before they were shipped out to Europe and America, This was what he had to say. I'll show you the clip shortly. But he said, Steve Harvey, quote unquote, this was real pain I felt going back to Ghana's slave castles. I could feel my ancestors on me, powerful beyond words that I can explain. I encourage as many of you as possible to go home for your ancestors. Their strength is in each of us, and we must honor their ultimate sacrifice in all that we do. Steve Harvey. So watch a little clip of what his experience was, retracing the path of his ancestors, and for a minute or two, or for a little while, standing in the dungeon where hundreds or dozens were cramped before they were shipped out in a very inhumane and undignified way to an unknown world. Steve Harvey.
Whenever they walked out of the door, there were 10 princesses, queen mothers, chiefs, warlords, and all that lost everything. Name, dignity, family, property, freedom. Even the language they spoke was taken away from them. They would go down the stairs, we go to see Alder, which is the original stairs they always used now. And whenever they went down the stairs, the soil on the shore became the last African soil all these African men and women ever touched on the continent of Africa. You know, Africans that left Africa never and ever leave here with their own will. They were forcefully taken from the continent.
So this short clip sums up the poignant and emotional moments that almost got Steve Harvey broken down. For me as a Ghanaian, as a young person who travels the world and interacts with the rest of the world, I've also been to those dungeons. And anytime you go into that small space, you just become angrier. You feel you could have done something to save your helpless ancestors. But we can't allow the pain of the past to determine our shared humanity today. Don't be violent Don't be hostile to a white person because of the crimes of that individual's forefathers or ancestors. Let's join hands and stand up to be counted. Let's seek higher education. Let's engage in commerce. Let's rub shoulders in business. Let's learn to have the best this world has to offer so that we'll be counted as co-equals rather than former, slaves or the sons of slaves or the great-grandchildren of slaves or the progeny of slaves. And the internet fraud, Sakawa, or any form of fraudulent activity is not a pious and virtuous way of responding to that historical ill and historical wrong that we suffer or we suffered as a people. And so let's join hands, those of us here and those in the diaspora. And today we have various vestiges of slavery take place. Young Africans who travel across the Sahara's desert carry out a perilous voyage across the Mediterranean Sea just to seek greener pastures. The onus lies on Black leaders, whether on this continent or elsewhere, to provide opportunities for young Black people around the world to feel proud of what we have. And for those who traffic human beings with the promises of better opportunities while they enslave them in foreign lands, you should desist from that as well. So as the world marks 400 days, 400 years, 4 centuries since the first batch of slaves were shipped out of this continent, I say, let's forgive. But because we can't forget, we can only rise up in terms of intellectuality, in terms of economic prowess, and be counted as co-equals, whether here on the African continent or in the boroughs of London or Harlem in the United States, where Black Africans or Black Americans feel disadvantaged. And we have our brothers and sisters in the US and other parts of the world who continue to, in a civil way, fight for their rights. Black Lives Matter. The arbitrary shooting and killing of Black young people in the United States. I have been to the US. You feel the tension in the air. Racism is real. Because of your Black color, in some states of the United States, not all, when you go into a public place like a restaurant or go to a recreational center, the way people even stare at you tells you that you are the odd one out there. So it's real. This Black skin is disadvantaged. And we keep asking, is it a crime to be born Black? Let's do our best and make the next century better than the 4 centuries that have gone by since the first wave of slaves were shipped out of this continent. Take care and let's join hands to help Pan-Africanism, Black conscience, and rise up intellectually and economically to be counted as co-equals rather than playing second fiddle to other peoples of the world. Bye-bye.